Happy New Year, Brian.
Happy New Year, Robert.
How you doing?
Good.
We gotta go.
Just got off a call with Cody for a presentation on Thursday. This Black Labs Human Performance Summit.
Oh, that thing
on.
again.
Yeah.
Again. Yep.
Yeah.
Is he doing it virtually this time?
Yes.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Are you presenting, or is he working with you to present himself?
I'm presenting. He and I are going to do something together.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he's going to start. He's going in the neuroscience, and then I'm going to go in and throw some haymakers.
As you do.
Yeah. Well. Whatever.
Yeah. It's good. It's all good.
Yeah.
Did you see the ball drop last night? Did you stay up?
Come on, bro.
No. Right, get tie, right? 9 o'clock.
I actually was up probably till like 10:30.
Oh, wow. That's pretty late.
Yeah, I've been sleeping real well lately, but I slept. I mean, at 10:30, I was out, and then anyway.
Yeah, we went to bed pretty early, and then we got woken up because some of our redneck neighbors decided to fire off fireworks for like 40 minutes, and it scares the dogs. And then somebody decided they were a rootin' tootin' cowboy at the end and fired off a pistol like 6 times. Pop, 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 pop. I don't know how far it was from the house, but couldn't be more than 400 meters at the most. Like, as the crow flies, just because of how loud it was.
Wow.
And I was like,
I didn't realize you had anybody who lived 400 meters within range of you.
oh yeah. Oh
really?
Yeah. Right across the field. Yeah, there's houses right across the field, but all those people are like, those are all families. Like, they're all little plots of land with families on them. I don't think like my neighbor Scott, who has like 2 single-digit age children, is outside busting rounds out of his 9 to celebrate New Year's.
Popping caps.
Yeah. I was like, I said to Tommy, I was like, do these idiots realize that those rounds come back down? Like, they're not, it's not
They don't just disappear.
No, they're not, it's not perpetual motion. They hit their terminal ballistics, and they turn around and return to Earth at high velocity. And like you could destroy property or kill somebody as the round comes back down. And I was like, there's people watching too many movies where people are like, yeah, into the air.
In the middle of a desert.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nonetheless.
Yeah. That's a negligent discharge, friends.
Jeez. It's just like such a funny world.
Yeah, that's almost as bad as all of the posts I've seen that were like, oh, I'm so glad 2020 is over.
I just don't even get, I don't know what that,
I'm like, you guys,
2021 couldn't get worse, because it can.
Well, I mean, first of all, you guys know that, like, as nature is concerned, like, there is no such thing. Like, we're just counting numbers from a made up point in time.
Time is a construct, my friends.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, we just all agreed on a calendar so we can do shit at the same time. But It's not like at the fundamental level of what's real. It's not. That's why people are like, the seasons are really off this year. I'm like, no, the calendar, like, it's just been happening long enough that the true patterns of nature have shown up. But like, nature didn't get it wrong because what you're used to on December. Like, like that's fascinating. That's not how that works.
Human behavior is just fascinating, and I just try and stay out of a judgmental side, because I know how afraid we all are of shit, and it's like just grasping for that, and that just shows you, like, grasping for an understanding of time, something that does not exist. The only thing that's ever existed and will ever exist is the moment now.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like I think it can be a powerful tool too, right? To change, like, hey, a New Year's resolution can be totally meaningless, or it can be really awesome, and you can start a new chapter. But you do
Mhm.
have to understand, like, the fact that you're making it up makes you totally vulnerable and totally powerful at the exact same
Yes.
time.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, and it creates a kind of a lean into a dependence towards that, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's kind of interesting because Tommy is doing all this work with dogs, and it's like all of the sort of like weird anthropomorphisms that we put on what our dogs are doing, some for positive, some for negative. And it's like at some point, you have somebody who actually understands animal behavior, you go, yeah, that's not actually why they're doing that. Like, dogs aren't, like, there's no vindictive, like, they're not doing that to ruin your day. Like, their ability to process isn't that advanced. Otherwise, like, they could figure out how to put on their own PJs, like in my dog's case, right? My dogs wear PJs. Like, they'd be able to figure out, they'd be able to plan, like, oh, it's cold and I should go ask for my jammy. But it's not, that's not how they function, right? They're functioning from limbic. So it's just conditioning. It's just conditioning, conditioning, conditioning. And what's interesting is you find out that, like, most of the time, us humans are functioning from the same level of understanding from just like cycles of conditioning. And we like to think like, oh man, I have this awesome monkey brain up here, and it's like, nah, you're just using it to make up a story for why your conditioning is okay.
Yeah.
And I
I'm
include
so
my
advanced.
yeah, I include myself in that, and then I see my dog doing shit, and I'm like, man, I'm just as bad as this dog. It's just my story about why I do it's way better than what he has. He's just doing it, he's just existing. Oh,
What's
jeez.
right in front of him? What's
Yeah,
right in front of him?
that's what he deals with. What's
Yep.
real?
Yep.
What what's real?
Nothing outside of it.
That's like, I remember. Have you ever read any books by Tom Brown Jr.? He's a like
Yeah.
survivalist, right?
Yes. Yes. I have.
Right.
I have a knife of his.
Oh, you have
For,
you.
yeah.
I remember that knife, man. The scout knife.
The yeah, but it's called like the Badger or something.
Yeah, it's based on like the Apache knife shape, right, that he learned from his mentor or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about that story. Like, I wonder if grandfather was like a real living person, or if he was like a combination of like mythological inputs that Tom crafted into a story in order to teach people, like, what did he discover from hanging out in the Pine Barrens a
Mm-hmm.
lot. I
Mm-hmm.
honestly don't know. I don't know that much about his actual story. I've never met Tom or anything.
I've heard he's a trippy dude.
Oh man, they do some crazy stuff at his
Oh
retreats.
yeah.
Like, he brings in a lot of different things. I had always wanted to go to one just to see what the experience was like, but
So funny. We both.
yeah, never got around to it. But in one of his books, he was
Yeah.
talking about like how grandfather, this person called his grandfather, was could like be out in the heat or the extreme cold, or he could just tolerate environmental conditions. And he asked him like, how do you do that? And he said, well, it doesn't bother me because it's real. And and it's just like this direct interface with the reality of the environment. It's like, oh well, I've accepted that, hey, this is real, so now I can move forward. And I'm, of course, that doesn't mean like get frostbitten like a dummy or anything like that, but at the same time, I just think, I don't know, we're a little fragile sometimes. We're a little special.
We're not. We're not. We're not.
you
It's
know
always. It's
yeah,
always, bro. Like like. Look, I'm not pointing fingers either.
no, that's why I said
I am fragile. Like, I realize how fragile I am. Yeah, sure. I've got my sauna and cold plunge in the back, a gym. I ride my bike. I'm out on the trails, and like, dude, I have not experienced what it's like to cross the plains, go through the mountains in the middle of a winter without housing. Like that. Not that many people have, but like, that's not too far off from our history. You
no,
know?
I like to think about it like, I've been thinking about it like, what's your vector of fragility? Like you have everybody has like strength. Like if you think about it like a geometric shape, like there are certain directions things can come from, and like you have your ramparts built up and you know how to deal with that. But then there's one little like weakness in the Death Star where like you get hit right there, bing, the whole thing just goes.
Bro, that's like that. That's the art of Zen right there, man. Like that's like why Zen is such a rad concept. It's like, dude, you're great here. You're an amazing hunter. Like just example. You know how to hunt. You can go out on your own for a week or two in the middle of nowhere and hunt. Where's your fragile point?
Yeah.
What's that? And that's I think that's where my fascination is with a lot of this stuff. Although there's just so much that there's fragile. Like it's
Oh yeah. Well,
like
well, and that's the whole thing too. Even if like you look at Christian, like the Christian belief system, that the idea of sin, right? Sin's an archery term that means you miss the mark. Yep. Right. And so then if you know that, then the idea like, oh, everybody's a sinner changes from like this like stalwart accusatory frame of reference to hey, we all make mistakes, and if you're humble and you pay attention to what mistakes you make and you try not to make the same ones over and over again, like literally like that's the path to heaven, is to try not to make the same mistakes over and over and over and over again, and to when you make a mistake to like out loud admit like I made this mistake, I take responsibility, and I'm gonna try to do something to change my behavior. And like that process is actually the key. And then you start to see like, oh well, Zen essentially is saying it's like, I think the difference is that the Buddhist traditions are like super pragmatic because they come from a different culture.
Well, so it's so funny because I mean this is my fault for bringing up Zen, but I've been listening to Alan Watts a lot lately, and he just did a bit about the differences between the like the fundamental differences between religion or Christianity and Zen Buddhism, and he broke it down into a pragmatic terms. He said,
yeah,
simply put, Christianity is too serious and Buddhism is not serious. We'll just deal with it right now versus putting it off. We'll come back to it. Everything's very serious. You're a sinner, you're bad, you should repent, versus like when something happens, deal with it there and then. That is like kind of more like the Zen side of things, right? And how life should not be taken too seriously at all. And where in the West we take things so seriously, everything is so serious, and hence why we fall into the category of comedy will cure everything. But
well, yeah, and if you look at like the theater traditions, right? There's always tragedy and there's always comedy. That's why there's two masks in theater, right? And I think that's why it's important to integrate both of those, because life, it can be very serious, but if you can find a way to laugh at the absurdity of how serious it can be.
And where does the word person come from? Persona. What is persona? The masks.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
that's it.
I was talking to a friend of mine who lived at a Zen monastery in Vermont for a while and like studied chant there and stuff, and he was saying how like in his when he was studying, they said what's more absurd than the fact that you're born and you die. You're born, you live, you die, and you know it. It's like, what's more absurd than that knowledge? And he's like, every other animal has it easy comparatively because they have I'm born, I live, I die, but they don't know. They're just living. So he says it's like it's so absurd, and that's where that like comical point of view from the like Zen Buddhism comes from, is like it's that Like, how absurd is it that we have knowledge of our own mortality? So, what you do with it after that. But, with all that said, then I see these, like, I see some of these, folks like putting up posts about how horrible 2020 was. And I'm like, man, like, there has to be some lost opportunity in there. Like, instead of trying to escape. And I'm not trying to downgrade anybody's suffering, but I'm also not about the suffering Olympics or anything. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
You don't need to explain that to me.
But it's like just historically, I mean, the last time we had a pandemic like this, you laid in the room with like your family member who had the Spanish flu, and like you stood there while they suffered and died. And most people were really poor. I think people were living on something like $1 a day at that time. Like, most of the world, like, I think it was like 80 to 90% of the world's population was in poverty by today's standards. And it's like, so not only did like your friends and loved ones die at a horrible rate, but you also had no money and no food and no job, and nobody gave a shit. And if you wanted to talk to anybody you cared about who lived far away, you were fucked, and you couldn't educate yourself. And now, like, a lot of that's been ameliorated, and like, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty different. I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to downgrade if anybody had a tough year, but I just think, man, what an opportunity to learn. If you have a hard time, I think the people who, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all right. In my experience and the people that I've worked with, especially like mentoring, it's been interesting because in a few cases, it's like, and I'm not going to downplay the fact, like, I mean, sure, I've had a tough year, but like, I don't think, it doesn't really have a lot to do with anything other than my own choices. And it's funny because every time something would come up about this whole pandemic with anybody who I've been working with, we'd get down to the root of it. And the fact is it was just a feeling of a loss of control.
Yeah.
And that's important to understand. And, I'm getting in. So I told you I was going to do this presentation next week, for that Black Labs thing with Cody and JP. And I'm touching on something Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate has written about. I'm reading it in When the Book Says, or When the Body Says No, his book, When the Body Says No. Mm-hmm. And the connection between disease seems to be one of emotional instability. There is no other connection between disease to disease to disease to disease. Like, if you were to connect and look at every single disease we've got, the biggest connection point that we've got is emotional instability. And so when you look at that as a society, like, you don't see disease rampant in natural settings or in the wild, right? Sure, there's disease, there's anomalies, there's these genetic mutations, things that happen. Those are, normal, right? That mm-hmm. does not happen within us. And when you start to look at this, and in looking at trauma, you can't finger point to where trauma begins and where it ends, because it's such a variant between people. Although there's many commonalities with how people experience trauma, it varies from individual to individual.
Well, if you think about trauma, and like, I think one of the easiest ways to understand trauma is to think about it in the context of like the physical body. So a trauma to your physical body means I'm not ready to adapt to that.
Yeah. So transitionally,
right.
So, and this goes back to what we would talk about, at the Art of Breath, especially within the lion and the antelope. It's like, so transitionally, if you find your weak point, going back to even what we were starting with on this conversation, finding your weak point or your trigger point, this is probably where that anchor is for why or how you're not managing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just, it's just fascinating to me because I like looking at this not only with myself but with people I'm working with or what I see online, and it's like, man, there are a lot of people that really, and I get it because it's addictive, bro. We are an addictive, like we are all addicts, and we need dopamine, we need serotonin, we have like, it's gonna happen. But it's like the idea that this place on social media is somewhere that I am going to find like real social structure is so odd to me. And you just start to see a crumbling, or I don't know, maybe it's the reality of where people are actually at because they're just so willing to show you who they are. Like whether it's in a comment section, it's like, even like you take something like The Rock, if you post something, right? And somebody gets pissed off about what he posted, so they feel the need to put a comment on there because they know he's got millions of followers and hopefully people will see that. And what I mean? And it's just
Yeah.
this whole emotional side to things where people have no control. They realize this is nothing they have control over. There is no control here. And so what they do have control over, they've lost. So we move into, and I do this routinely with things, right? Where I'm grasping for trying to control things that I have no way of controlling, but I might
Well,
have some influence on.
well, and that's where that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about conditioning, right? It's like we're being conditioned all the time through our own choices and through the willful efforts of others to guide our behavior, whether it's through social media or marketing or whatever. And the question, because like there is no not being conditioned. Like you're set up to be conditioned, because if you're like, if you even think about it like strength and conditioning, conditioning means a more efficient use of energy to repeat the same outcome, right? To repeat a known outcome. That's conditioning. And so the question is, how connected are you to the sources of your own conditioning? And then can you interject on your own behalf to redirect your behavior when you don't want to be conditioned that way anymore? And that's the thing, is that conditioning is, it's so much a part of who we are, because nature's always looking for the most efficient route of energy, and changing requires a lot of energy because you're disrupting conditioning, right? And so your body, because it follows the laws of nature, is like, hold on, we've been doing it this way for a long time, we know how to deal with this groove, it's going to take a lot for us to change what we're in. And so that's why, I think people find it's so difficult to change, even if you feel like you sort of want to. And that's why having a practice is so important. Any kind of practice, some practice where you're forced to confront yourself and deal with challenges, and there's novel stresses and environments where your emotions will show up, because it's like a little magnifying glass, a little spotlight on your conditioning. And when that spotlight shows up, you can either, and I think that's why CrossFit was one of the reasons CrossFit was so good, because it forced people to suffer really hard. I mean, I've seen a lot of people cry because they were failing at a lift,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And it's because they had an expectation of the outcome that didn't match the reality. And some people pick themselves up in that situation and go, man, I didn't prepare myself properly to be successful in this event. And some people go, this isn't for me, or you aren't a good enough coach, or whatever. They point it externally, and not like, hey, what can I learn from this? What's the growth opportunity? And a really interesting thing that I heard recently was like, how you were talking about disease states, and like, in nature, we don't have nearly like the instances of chronic disease. And you look at like indigenous cultures, and they don't have, nearly the instances of chronic metabolic disease and things like that we have. But what they do have is like infant mortality, right? Sudden death, predation. And so there's this really good quote that I heard recently, which is, you only get to pick your poison, you don't get to not have a poison. And so it's like, because like it just doesn't work that way. Like either we get, this some of this disconnect from the direct consequences of the natural world, where we don't have as much catastrophic sudden death and predation, and then we get metabolic disease, right? Or we go, "Well, no, we're going to live this paleo style back. Let's get back to the woods." And it's like, okay, but if you do away with this modern stuff, then like more babies will die and women will die in childbirth. And like, so it's like finding that balance point between the two. Cause I think sometimes people tend to romanticize the indigenous lifestyle, not really realizing like what comes along with that, and that there's a lot of like, no matter what, like there is hardship, like it's just part of the deal.
Yeah, you ready to deliver your own babies?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know, I find it kind of interesting. And regardless, we find ourselves born into this time and culture. And I think that's why practices that show you where the opportunities inside of stress are, because it is coming. I was just saying this in the I finished the breath science videos for the teen breathing study for HHPF,
Mhm.
right? And at the very end, I was kind of doing a summary, and I was like, hey, this is all about finding where the opportunity is for you guys, because there is no life without stress. There isn't one. It doesn't exist. Like anybody who tells you that you can have a life without stress is lying to you. Like that's not real. So then the question becomes, how do I prepare myself for the stress that will show up? And there's some stress that you choose and some stress that's imposed upon you. So you had, and these practices like breath work and training and whatever your practice is, the point of the practice is to get more bandwidth of resilience so you can handle that stuff better. So, but then again, we're all fragile. You know, there is an angle that life will find to break you down.
There is. Are you drinking coffee?
Not with this hand. This is water. This is coffee.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. I you see, I was thinking about how many athletes actually get the ability to understand that what they're doing is a practice. And it's very few. And I think of, I always, for some reason, I default to Carrie Walsh, and it's just because I've spent enough time around her and like her husband, and they're such positive people. They're so, and look, man, that chick wants to win, and she does not want to stop competing, but she uses it in a way that I have seen so very few people. And you, like, Jordan didn't even use it like she did. And I'm not putting a comparative narrative, but I mean, you look at somebody like a Jordan in the last. Did you see the Last Dance?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I was just disappointed in like the like who he became. Like, I'm like, wow, man, you're an old dude who's alone and looks like he's got jaundice because he's probably been drinking a lot. And I'm not trying to shit on him because I still think he was probably the greatest athlete we've ever seen. I mean, the guy changed everything. And I think what bothers me is that people believe that is what you need to be like in order to get to what he did. And I don't believe that one bit. And so we live in this time talking about 2020
Yeah.
being such a terrible thing. And it's like, really? Was it? Or was it just missed opportunity?
Well, and I think too, man. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, some of that stuff is like function of personality too. Some people have competitive drive, but again, you pick your poison. And so, like, just to bring up that same era of basketball, Steve Kerr was on that team, right? And so he wasn't nearly as influential of a player
Nah, but
as Jordan, but look what he's done as a coach,
as,
right?
yeah,
That guy has a social intelligence that is,
yes.
largely unrivaled. And and he played that same kind of role on the Bulls when he was there. Like he was provided a real social glue that helped everybody navigate personalities. And so some of it is just like, where's your value? You know, where do you provide value? And I think it's important too to remember that, like, we have this idea of the individual, but also like there's a team aspect, there's a group aspect, a group intelligence, and you sometimes you need those pipe hitters who are just like hardcore like that. And I've been around a lot of folks like that who are just
Yeah.
like whatever, I don't care, I don't feel sorry for you, get it done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
and,
I get it.
but on the other side of that, you can't have your cake and eat it too and be like, how come nobody wants to hang out with me? Well, it's like, well, it's because you're an asshole. But you're an asshole who helps us win and get stuff
This
done.
is your role. Do you enjoy this enough to like not have to feel sorry for, you know, like,
yeah.
good point.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like
fair point.
yeah, where are your values? But for me personally, I I don't jive like that. Like I'm not hyper competitive. And you see it in modern times, like a guy like Conor McGregor, right? Or like Gordon Ryan in combat sports. Like those are competitors. Like those guys want to. It's like they want to take it all. They want to win everything. They'll they'll talk so much shit that it gets everybody riled up to watch them and to beat them. And they know how to play that competitive game and get eyeballs on them.
Yeah.
But for me, like I value social interaction a lot, and like for me that wouldn't work. And it's kind of interesting, you know, I was listening to a really good podcast. Who's it with Laird and Rich Roll, right? And Laird was just talking about, Rich asked him about, hey, being a competitive surfer versus the direction he went. And he was like, well, you know, when you're a competitive surfer, like it's really hard to innovate, right? Because you find a groove of what works and what will help you win. And that mindset is very different than
Mm.
I want to go where I've never been before. He was like, if you're going to win in a competition, then by definition, you have to find a groove of specialty that keeps you winning and beating others. And he was like, that drives some people. He's like, that doesn't drive me. My nature is as a creative person and an innovator. And so I had to be honest with myself about what what really fulfills me. And I was like, man, that is a wonderful perspective. And it doesn't sort of, you know, demonize the other path. It's just like, hey, this is just who I am. And that's not what I wanted to get out of surfing. And so
Yeah.
I did something else. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, hey,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting perspective. Um
Yeah.
and
He and I had some real deep conversations around all that.
around competitive surfing and all that, or just
And
finding your way. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, what's funny is he's actually probably one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. And he, you know, part of that, and I don't know that he shared this on Rich Roll, but it was like, I mean, part of what we'd talked about, and he's talked about, I think in his documentary, um, was he wasn't going to let somebody who's sitting on a beach judge him
Yeah.
for what he was doing in the water, you know, and how he was doing it, you know, and there's definitely way more to that, but you know, I mean, dude, he was he's fierce competitive. Like, I mean, when we would train together, dude, if I did something, he would have to do it and do it better. And if, you know, and luckily, but look, that went two ways, you know, like he would
Yeah.
push me, I would push him, like, and you know, that was just how that was. But it's like, he's fascinating because he understood the creative aspect of it. And I think that was it. You know, that's why he has innovated so many things. Like people have no idea really how much influence he's had, even on their lives.
Oh,
Like,
that's when you know you're a real influencer. When people's like when people are doing activities that you made up and they don't know that you made it
yeah,
up.
like people running around stand-up paddleboarding don't realize they're doing that because Laird Hamilton figured it out.
Yeah.
Legitimately.
Yeah.
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 And he's gotten no credit for it. And he doesn't give a fuck. Like
No.
he does in one sense, but he doesn't in most sense.
He's on to something else.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Seeing him stand up paddleboard and
Is
Malibu was
yeah.
it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I was like, this dude has magic. Like he has water
Yeah.
magic. Like that is 6 foot shore break. That should have smashed his board right into the sand. And he hopped off, and it was like the wave handed his board to him. I was like, what the fuck
The
did I
rest of
just
us would
see?
have died.
I know. I was like, what just happened? Like it was literally like the ocean handed him his equipment. And I was
Yeah.
like,
You
I was
see
like,
that, and you're like, oh, I
oh
want to go try that. And it's like, no,
no,
don't do that. And
no.
he's like, no,
Yeah, he'll
this
warn
is
you.
where you need to understand your level of understanding. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he expects that out of people, like,
Yeah.
which is great.
He'll help
You
you
know,
be
anyway.
safe though. He'll help you be
Oh,
safe.
yeah.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure. He'll be
no,
like,
for sure.
but yeah, yeah, paddling around and then watching him go by. I'm like, does he have a motor on his board? Because I'm pretty sure he's going against the current right now, and
Effortless.
it just looks
Yeah.
like it doesn't apply to him.
Yeah, we would race up and down the Honolulu River. Oh my God, it was like 3 or 4 miles up and then 3 or 4 miles back, and I mean it was just torturous. And he would just do it effortlessly. It was, yep,
Yeah.
upriver, downriver, like whatever. I don't want to turn this into a Laird thing, but
No.
he's a special person, that's for sure.
No, that's cool. I think we can talk about whatever we want.
We can talk about whatever we want.
This is our Zoomcast. People can hit pause or skip. That's fine. That's the beauty of it. Well, anyway,
2020 is over. 2021 begins.
Yep.
Let's see what happens.
We're here. We're in our new made up number days.
Yep. To complain about how the weather's off.
I know. I remember first learning about the Gregorian calendar, and I was like, "Why is it called Gregorian calendar?" And I was like, "Oh, because somebody called Gregor made it up. Like it's not like they were like, well, this is the math that works the best for us to do stuff at the same time."
Turns out this is just the economic medical system we all agreed on. We could change it at any point.
It does. It's a huge social contract. And it's kind of funny, like even that's what money is. Like when you look at money, like the gold standard is long gone. Like the little rectangles that we hand each other in the rare occasion that happens is literally just a piece of paper that says, hey, this is how much my time is worth.
That's almost gone.
It's almost gone. Then it's down to little rectangular cards, which, they kept the rectangle because it's close to the shape of cash, because we're so shape driven, right? So here's your little rectangle. We know you're used to these rectangles. We're going to give you a new rectangle. And then eventually it'll just be like a retinal scan or something, or you'll have a microchip.
Yeah, you're just going to think it.
Yeah, you have a microchip in your finger.
Yeah, I'll give you this many points or whatever. There you go.
Units, like on Guardians of the Galaxy. Right.
Right.
Oh dear. Well, I think that's a little over 30.
There you go.
Cool. 2 down. Episode 2 of Shift Perspective. Cool. We'll keep knocking these out. This is fun. Yeah. This is essentially us having a conversation we would have had anyway if I just called you.
Exactly right. We're gonna say that for a while, and then we'll stop saying that.
Yeah. Well, we can edit it out too if we want.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's funny because as time passes.
Yeah, it'll get and we'll probably end up, once we kind of get warmed up, we'll start talking about some more specific things like research we come across, or maybe on one of the next ones we can talk about that outside article.
Oh, yes.
Stir the pot a little bit. Love to
stir the pot on that.
I know. Haymakers, pot stirring. That's right up your alley.
That's right. Hey, it's not hard to reach out or for people to actually give credit where credit's due, or talk about, hey, there's people that have been talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we're going to make light of it and make it popular as if we created it.
Yeah. Like every strength and conditioning textbook for the last 40 years.
I mean, we could talk about the fact that, this originated 5,000 years ago.
Totally.
We were just late to the game,
Real late.
real late.
But we do, like Art of Breath, we're like, hey, we're just trying to use modern words to describe what people have figured out like a real long time ago. So
Yeah.
anyhow.
All right.
All
Till
right, dude.
next time.
Yes,
Have a
sir.
good day.
Talk to you later.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Bye.